Wednesday, March 18th, 2015, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues Mike McKean and Earnest Perry. On our program this week, a new collaboration between Starbucks and USA Today to start a dialogue about race. We'll talk about what's behind it and whether we think it'll work. Did Time magazine really give Hillary Clinton devil's horns on the cover, or are people overthinking this one? And we're going to talk about what may be seen as a shot over the bow, the White House deleting a requirement to submit to Freedom of Information Act requests on National Freedom of Information Day. There's a whole lot more that we're hopefully going to get to as well, but we're going to start by talking about the cold case that may have just been solved at True False and on our TV screens. By now, you probably know, police arrested Robert Durst late Saturday at a New Orleans hotel and charged him with the 2000 murder of his friend Susan Berman. The case had long gone cold, though friends and relatives had believed that perhaps he had something to do with Berman's death and the disappearance of his first wife, Kathy Durst, and his best friend, who he admittedly dismembered in Galveston, Texas. Yes, that's 3 people. The Jinx is a 6-part series that ran on HBO, wrapping up Sunday night. The first 5 parts also screened at True False earlier this month here in Columbia, documenting this whole really involved, convoluted story. And the final installment, which aired Sunday night, busted the whole thing wide open. Filmmakers Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling presented Durst with some physical evidence, 2 matching handwriting samples, one on a letter he sent to Berman, and one on the anonymous note a tipster sent to the Beverly Hills Police Department. In his last scene on camera, Durst tried to explain away the striking similarities in the block lettering and the consistent misspelling of the word Beverly. It had an extra E in both of those samples. But when his reaction off camera was run, his mic was still on. He was in a restroom. Listen to it for yourself.
I'm having difficulty with the question. What the hell did I do? Kill them all. Of course.
Right after that, the screen goes blank. That's the end of the film. It was the most abrupt ending I think I've seen since the series finale of The Sopranos. But just like with that HBO program, people kept talking about it. And while they're not speaking publicly anymore, because they're pretty sure they're going to be called as witnesses in the case, the filmmakers were out front talking about their discoveries and their process earlier this week. Here they are with Judge Jeanine Pirro on Fox News Channel Monday. Interestingly enough, she was a player in this whole thing, too. The then Westchester County DA in New York investigating Durst's possible connections in the disappearance of his wife, Kathy.
All right, let me ask you, why did you do this? In the end, what were you hoping to accomplish? Start with you, Andrew.
We like to find truth. You know, we do like to find...
Did you find truth?
I think we did.
What's the truth?
I mean, our job here is to place it in front of the audience for them to see. That's what we're going to do, and that's what people are going to respond to.
I mean, the journey we took, I mean, as you said, it was an 8-year journey. You know, it was one of just unfolding one card after another card after another card.
It was brilliant.
Yeah, and now we're here, and we want the audience to experience the journey we took. We don't want to just get in front of it.
I'm sorry, I've had since Sunday morning to wrap my head around this, and I still don't know that I've really gotten there. There are so many different angles we can talk about on this one. Let's start with the confession. There's some question as to whether or not this will be admissible in court or not.
Well, I mean, and that's kind of the media moment, even more so than the handwriting, right? Is that he appears to confess. You can bet that his defense attorney, Dick DeGuerin, who got him off on the dismemberment case back in 2004 or whatever, has probably got a strategy for saying that that wasn't truly a confession. Whether it will be admitted in court is another thing. He's got a great defense attorney, the best that money can buy. We'll see. The prosecutors, like Pirro, former prosecutors, are making the case that he knew all along that he had a live mic turned on, that the live mic had recorded things previously. Even his lawyer had come in at one point, apparently, when he said something off.
In the first interview that he did with them, right?
Said, be quiet, shut up, or whatever. So he knew he had a mic on. He knew the mic was live, so the prosecution can argue that it should be able to come in.
Well, it's also going to be one of those instances of what is the jury going to believe if this is a jury, if it gets to a jury trial. What is the jury going to believe in terms of the way the questions were framed, the way the story is framed? Are they going to be able to see the outtakes? Or are they just going to see what was presented? I mean, there's a lot here that they're going to have to sift through before they can come to any kind of judgment, and probably even before they even get to a jury.
So we also don't know when he was in that bathroom who he was talking to, if he was talking to himself, if he was murmuring into a mirror, if he's on a telephone with somebody else. The fact that he's in a bathroom, is there an expectation of privacy even though he knew he was wearing a microphone?
I think that's going to be a question that the defense is going to present to the judge to determine whether or not this is admissible. Is there an expectation of privacy if you're in the bathroom? But I go back to what Mike was saying. He knew he was on a live mic. Now the question becomes, did he know the mic was live when he went into the restroom?
And what really matters is not what lay people like us believe, but what a judge decides on whether something is admissible. And believe me, the lawyers from both sides will have plenty of time to prepare their arguments. Same way, frankly, with the seemingly less controversial bit of evidence that they released on the Jinx, which was the handwriting samples, which seem to be pretty obviously the same person wrote those two things. They have a handwriting expert who said they were the same, written by the same person. On the other hand, how did they get that material? How much collaboration did they do with law enforcement before or after they showed it to him?
So let's talk for a minute about collaboration with law enforcement through this whole process. These filmmakers were working with Robert Durst and telling this story both from a loosely based fictional perspective, a film that was produced several years ago, and now this documentary perspective. At what point, as they begin to collect this evidence, should they begin collaborating or turning some of this evidence over, or at what point do they hold on to it?
Well, the question isn't so much when do they begin to cooperate. I think it's up to the prosecutor and law enforcement to try to gather that material. Now you're going to have a problem with, wait a minute, are you infringing upon our journalistic responsibilities and our First Amendment rights? We, and when I say we, I'm talking about the journalistic we aren't responsible for doing the prosecutor's work or law enforcement's work. And that's where you're going to start having some issues there.
I agree with that generally. I do think that, and the documentarians confessed to the notion that they, as they talked about it, they figured, well, wait a minute, this guy, may be a serial killer. I mean, so he could commit a crime again, or he could flee. So to what extent do we have to share? And they say that whether or not they were morally or ethically, liable for that, they did decide after they found the tape. And that's an interesting thing too. They said they didn't find the confession until 2 years after they did the interview, but pretty soon after that, they did share that with law enforcement.
So I watched all 6 episodes of this on Sunday when I woke up Sunday morning and started seeing social media kind of blow up about this guy who had been arrested. I just kind of started looking into it and suddenly became very interested in it and watched the 5 episodes and then live on TV Sunday night. And that final installment was just absolutely fascinating. Listening as the filmmakers were being very strategic in planning ahead, and this is as a journalism educator, someone who's teaching interviewing, planning ahead how they were going to set up their questions, trying to anticipate answers, and how to get him with some of those zingers to make sure they still got what he needed before he may get up and bolt.
Well, I'm curious in terms of that was his lawyer there? And if his lawyer was there, why would he not step in? And I know he stepped in at certain points, but
if his lawyer was there, it was off camera.
Yeah,
whereas in previous installments of the program, they had shown the lawyer there.
Right, and that's when I watched, I didn't watch all of it, but I watched part of it, and the whole time I'm sitting there going like, wait a minute, but I know he had his lawyer in these other ones. I don't see his lawyer here, and these are some pretty pointed questions. What's going on there? So I mean, that's just just the things that popped up in my mind.
And I mean, I did think that the rehearsing the interviews really kind of sheds a light on the process that journalists go through if they're going to be good at sort of entrapping somebody that's into confessing or whatever. But I also thought there were some interesting things about how they apparently staged some of the shots. And there was an interesting piece on the Links blog that you posted about whether or not they deliberately manipulated the timeline to make the narrative seem more clear, and how much they knew when. But those are kind of things that not just documentarians but sort of standard TV journalists do all the time too. We edit lots of things to try to get more clarity, sometimes oversimplifying in the process.
And that goes back to the point that I made earlier about when and if this gets to court, those outtakes, how that was edited, is also going to become a part of at least what the defense is going to say, maybe some leading questions and those kinds of things. So
I'll tell you, there were a couple other really interesting media angles to this story.
I still have a couple on my list too. You bring yours up first.
Well, one of them was this whole business with Janine Pirro, right, who was the prosecutor at the time, now from Westchester County in New York. She's now on Fox News as a talk show host, has her own thing. And it was funny because she was on Fox and Friends, I think it was, or whatever, and they were kind of patting her on the back. So you finally have been vindicated. This guy's going away. Well, I don't know, because Dick DeGuerin, the guy who was the lawyer back then during that case in Texas, the Galveston dismemberment case, managed to get him off. And part of the reason he blamed her for the reason that Durst went off into hiding with a wig and all this kind of stuff. So I'm not so sure I'd be congratulating myself yet if I were her or her Fox colleagues.
Well, and along those same lines, if she had opened up or reopened that investigation into Kathy Durst's whereabouts in 1999, I believe, had she actually solved anything or deserved a pat on the back, it wouldn't be 2015 when we start talking about this again.
Well, that's another one of those things where you have people in the legal profession who become TV personalities, and they get caught up in the retry of certain legal cases and sort of try to vindicate themselves for some things that they either didn't do well or just flat out got beaten by another attorney.
Let's talk for a minute about the timing of the arrest and how, in a lot of ways, I don't know if we'll ever really know if it had anything to do, but boy, HBO really kind of has law enforcement to thank for creating a whole lot of unanticipated publicity, both for this program and HBO as a whole.
And that tells you something about how the filmmakers obviously did collaborate with police, at least sharing, as they said, I don't know, 6 months ago or whatever, information. So the police knew that that episode was about to air, and they suspected that he was a very high flight risk. And so that probably suggests why they moved in on him, because he was staying in a New Orleans hotel under an assumed name. And so who knows? There was at least, if not direct collaboration between the filmmakers and the cops. It was very fortuitous timing.
Well, and I also thought about it in terms of, well, there's some quid pro quo here. It's like, we're going to go ahead and air this. As soon as we air it, then you can go and arrest him, and then that would create even more of a buzz. I mean, I'm thinking that, we'll share this information with you if you allow HBO to air this now instead of, say, 3 months ago or 6 months ago or whenever.
And if you think there was just HBO that was kind of benefiting from all of this, how about the New York Times and putting out that the alert to everybody who has their app right as the credits are rolling? Oh, by the way, the guys, confessed.
Well, and during
on tape.
the course of the day, because I have this habit when I'm watching TV, I'm definitely one of those second screen people. So I'm looking things up on IMDb. I'm watching certain episodes of it and going on the website. And the website for the Jinx had a link all day that they kept updating, breaking news linking off to the New York Times. So there was quite clearly some collaboration going on.
But there were people who were mad because the New York Times was basically issuing a spoiler for people who hadn't seen it on the West Coast yet.
This next story that I want to talk about is one we probably should have talked about last week but didn't, and it frankly just kept building. So we're going to talk about it now. That video that was captured aboard a bus that showed members of the now shuttered Oklahoma chapter of the Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity singing racist chants. The Greek system hasn't gotten much good press recently, with stories of deadly hazing incidents, that now discredited Rolling Stone story about sexual assault at UVA, and now this. But this one is real, and it's bad, and the media latched onto it hard. There was a lot of outrage, and then, well, listen to what Jon Stewart had to say.
There was outrage.
They're disgusting, they're horrible.
Disgusting and racist.
Awful. Vile and vulgar.
Sickening.
Yes, it's awful. And the fraternity chapter was immediately and rightfully disbanded. 2 people expelled for the disgraceful display. I mean, there's no excuse for it, or so you would think.
The kids that are buying hip-hop, it's a white audience, and they hear this over and over again.
Popular culture becomes a cesspool. A lot of corporations profit off it, and then people are surprised that some drunk 19-year-old kids repeat what they've been hearing.
Exactly. 2 things. First of all, the kids on that bus weren't repeating a rap song that they had heard. They were gleefully performing one of their fraternity's old, let's call them, anti-Negro spirituals, featuring a word that predates rap and probably folk and thought. Black rappers did not introduce that word into the vernacular. And second of all, how come when conservatives talk about African Americans, they say, these people need to take responsibility for themselves, pull up those pants, get a job. But when white people do something racist, they're all, well, you can't blame them. How could those poor children know wrong from right after being driven to madness by the irresistible power of the hippity-hoppity?
Micah Brzezinski, I'm sorry, I'm laughing because of Ernest and Mike's reaction here. Ernest is like tapping the table. Micah Brzezinski tried to walk that back later in the day. What'd she say? How does she try to explain this away?
You can't explain this away.
You
You just can't do it. I mean, I don't know where they were going with that, but it's you can't. It almost for a minute there I thought, am I watching Fox?
Yeah.
Because they were trying to use rap music to explain away what they were doing on the bus, and you can't get into that blame game because it just doesn't fit.
Now, I will say this, though. I mean, first you had Joe Scarborough and you had Bill Kristol there, 2 definite conservatives on Morning Joe. Micah Brzezinski is kind of like the moderate to liberal foil. So it wasn't just conservatives that say stupid things at times like this. She tried to walk it back probably because of her reputation as being that person in the middle on the show, but she didn't do a very good job of it.
So here's the one question that I have, and it's something that kind of came up after 9/11. It's something that comes up after incidents where there's a lot of violence shown in video. And I realize that our TV and internet audience just saw it play in part of that Daily Show clip. But when do we stop playing that video on the bus? I can tell you I'm tired of seeing it, and I think it needs to go.
Well, I think you should stop playing that video on the bus when that becomes the story instead of putting it in the proper context, and we talk about that all the time. And I think it goes to the larger argument about what happens in these sort of settings and how this fosters this negative atmosphere that we're experiencing here on the University of Missouri campus, and they're experiencing it in other campuses, and how do we actually deal with that issue and talk about those issues in a way that's going to sort of move us away from the images you see on the bus.
Have we reached that point, though, where everybody has seen those images from the bus and continuing to use them is really just providing wallpaper to television news coverage?
I don't know, but I'm not so upset about them using that video over and over again at this point because, one, I think it's a really important story, and this video does show that it's really visual evidence of the kind of culture of racism, and for that matter, the culture of sex crimes and sex abuse that we're seeing from the story out of Penn State. Yesterday with the fraternity that has the Facebook page with women and partially nude and all of that. I mean, it needs to be shown, and I think if that's what it takes to get people to talk about it, okay, I'm ready to see that.
I mean, I would have
to
agree with Mike. I think it's as long as you see these images out there. I mean, you need to see them, you need to show them, and you need to put them in the proper context and call people out. I think what President Boren did at OU is what should have been done. I mean, he said, look, I'm going to kick you out. I'm going to kick your fraternity out. If you don't like it, take me to court.
And frankly, when are people going to learn how stupid can you be? You are always potentially on camera these days with cell phone cameras. You are always potentially liable to have whatever you post on the internet be made available to the public, whether it's behind a private, Facebook page or not. wise up, people.
Well, and there was actually a third incident that has come out in the last 24 hours about a Jewish fraternity chapter at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, where swastikas were found painted inside their house after a party there this weekend. So there is no doubt there is a discussion about race that needs to happen. I think we can all agree on that, but who should lead it? Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz thinks his coffee chain should start the conversation, and he's teaming up with USA Today to do it. He's encouraging employees at more than 12,000 Starbucks locations worldwide to write "Race Together" on paper cups and to talk about racial issues with customers. And this Friday, USA Today will publish a special supplement that will show up in papers and in the chain's stores.
And I think it can be a primary vehicle to get people to understand that we need a new level of sensitivity, understanding around these issues, and perhaps we can, again, really create and elevate a conversation in our stores that could go well beyond our stores. And perhaps we can convince other businesses and other business leaders to join with us as a result of what we're going to do.
It's an interesting idea, conversation we all agree needs to happen. From the media standpoint, native advertising, you think?
Well, I mean, it's really not clear yet, and
not.
The USA Today supplement is not coming out until Friday. Well, we have the baristas already apparently writing on cups as of Monday, so we don't really know exactly what USA Today's participation is going to be in it. And frankly, I mean, I think that's a really interesting part of the story because a lot of folks are slamming Starbucks. Whether you think they're a good corporate citizen or not, slamming them because, well, it's not realistic, or you don't treat your own employees particularly well, whatever. Well, let's look at the media. I mean, USA Today, I think as I remember from the latest statistics that the AS&E puts out every year, something like 18% of their leaders in the newsroom are African American or Hispanic. That's not exactly representative, and Starbucks getting bashed for that. Why is USA Today not getting bashed for it? I mean, I kind of think that all the attention going on Starbucks, we're putting too much on them and not enough on the media.
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, we've talked about the media's role in these instances over and over again. And we've also talked about the fact that they haven't done a very good job, not only of hiring and retention within media, but also in the way in which they talk about and depict a lot of these things. I mean, we just got through talking about the OU thing and the fact that they played the video over and over again. But one of the things they are doing is they aren't putting those in the context and starting the discussion. So I will be interested in seeing whether or not this supplement is just basically a rehash of what's going on, or are they actually going to add something to the conversation? And I think I want to at least say that Starbucks is doing that. They're at least adding something to the conversation. Now, whether or not it's going to be beneficial, whether or not it's going to move the conversation forward, that's to be seen. But at least they're making an attempt, and that's more than I could say for a lot of corporations in the United States.
And maybe this is getting to sound like an old refrain for me, but I'm really tired of all of the snark on social media. I mean, we talk. If you want to criticize whether or not this is just sort of hashtag activism versus real activism, okay, that's fine. But just to be immediately, automatically slamming Starbucks for something that appears their CEO is serious about, it appears that employees of the company brought this idea to the table, not some marketing team. Give them the benefit of the doubt whether it's going to work or not.
Yeah, I think it's one of those. We talked about this over and over about people hitting the send button before they think, and this is a perfect example of that. All the bashing that's going on social media about, Starbucks is just trying to make some money off of an issue that's really important and really needs to be talked about. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to start a conversation about it, and they're getting slammed by some in social media. But I'm also seeing that there's some people saying, hey, at least Starbucks is trying to do that. I mean, they have their issues. They have issues in terms of hiring. They have issues in terms of where they place their coffee houses, because they're not in poor neighborhoods. Right. They're not in neighborhoods that have a majority minority population.
And if they do, then it becomes an issue of gentrification, and it's almost there goes the neighborhood and changing the entire makeup of the neighborhood. Well, it's Sunshine Week, a time when journalists, civic groups, libraries, nonprofits, schools, really anyone interested in the public's right to know information come together to promote a dialogue on the need for an open government. So imagine the reaction when we found out Monday, the first day of Sunshine Week, that the White House Office of Administration announced it's ending regulations subjecting it to the Freedom of Information Act. 7 years ago, a federal judge ruled this department didn't have to comply because it doesn't have substantial independent authority. The Office of Administration basically provides administrative support and business services to the president's executive office. So maybe this isn't as big of a deal as it sounds like on the surface.
Well, I think
but it's still the government trying to hide stuff.
Thank you. You took the words right out of my mouth. It's still the government. They're still receiving taxpayer funds. And if they're receiving taxpayer funds, they should fall under the Freedom of Information Act, and that material should be open for the public to view.
I mean, at the very least, it's a poke in the eye from the White House to people who are interested in transparency in government. And I frankly think there was more interesting statistics that came out from an AP story today about all of this. They showed that the government takes longer to turn over files that are requested than they ever have. They more regularly say they can't find documents that they should be able to find. And they refused a record number of times last year to turn over files quickly when media could say that it was something that's newsworthy. And in fact, their backlog from 2013 to 2014 of unanswered requests was up like 55%. So the White House has no excuses and nowhere to hide.
And I mean, you can even go past the White House and you can start looking at state and local governments. I mean, there are a lot of news organizations and individuals that were trying to get information about what was going on in Ferguson. And the amount of money that Ferguson was asking for in terms of providing
duplication
and it was ridiculous. I mean, you talk about $135 an hour is what they were charging for their workers to get it. I mean, if that's the case, then they should have some of the best paid workers in the United States in terms of providing information for the government.
Okay, well, before we go this week, let's talk one more time about the fallout from those emails Hillary Clinton sent from her private server while Secretary of State. Time magazine felt it was a story so important it belonged on the cover of the print edition this week. Only some are saying it looks like the placement of Clinton's head makes it look like she's grown devil's horns. What do you think? Horns or just bad placement?
I think it's just bad placement. I mean, Time has done this before using other images. I don't see where this is actually.
It's happened with her husband when he was president, with George Bush, both of them, with popes, with other world leaders.
Well, I loved how Time responded to it. They put up a slideshow showing the 34 other times where their cover shots looked like the Pope, John Travolta, Bill Clinton, Vladimir Putin. Well, maybe in that instance he really is a devil. I don't know. But it's one more example, I think, of this social mediated, hyper partisan, we're too thin-skinned culture, and we get over it.
Yep.
Okay.
I think I just think it's just one of those instances where 2016 election is starting and it's starting early.
And everybody's going to latch on to whatever it is that they can.
Exactly.
Well, we're just about out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about the topics we talked about today and one more that we didn't get to. You can see more about that on the links blog under the programs tab at KBIA.org. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, leave us comments or questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next time, and more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan and Maya Jackson for directing today's show, and to Pat Akers for handling the audio. Kristen Rolling is our associate producer. We're going to be taking next week off, but you'll be able to catch another half hour of Marketplace at this time. No fooling, though. Ernest, Mike, and I will be back with you on April 1st for another edition of Views of the News.